So first of all, as always, I'd like to say shalom and welcome to this special Talking Memory event. First, they killed my father, a daughter of Cambodia remembers, a conversation with Loung Ung. My name is Medine Shachar, and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as a guide and as an educator. I want to welcome our global audience from all over the world, as you can see in the chat box, including our friends and colleagues from Holocaust museums and institutions and centers, academics and students from universities, historians, and our many, many friends who attend our Talking Memory series. A special welcome to the survivors, as always, and their families that are with us today. We want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. And today's program is in partnership with our dear, dear friends at the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation and Classrooms Without Borders. And I just want to say that it is because of your support and your mission to raise awareness about genocides around the world that inspired the making of this program today. And before we start, some housekeeping notes. As always, the program will be recorded and available on the Ghetto Fighters House YouTube channel, and I'm sure our partners will also want to post a recording, and we will put a link to our YouTube channel in the chat box, and it'll be available within a few days. We have put everybody on mute in order to avoid unwanted noise during the program. But again, you can use the chat box to ask questions, to make comments. We will be taking a break for the Jewish holidays coming up in September, but we'll be back in October with a special three-part series on the Jewish community in the Netherlands during the Holocaust, inspired by the story of the De Zotti family and the recently released book, Invisible Years, of Families' Collected Account of Separation and Survival During the Holocaust in the Netherlands. The book was written by one of the descendants, one of the daughters of three sisters that survived by going into hiding during the Holocaust. And we'll send information and links to all the programs about the series soon. And now I would like to invite Yigal Cohen, the CEO of the Ghetto Fighters House, to give the opening remarks. Yigal? You have to unmute, Yigal.
Thank you. Thank you, Medine. Shalom and welcome. I am honored to open today's International Talking Memory program that will deal with one of the worst acts of genocide the world has known in the second half of the 20th century. Almost 30 years after the end of World War II and the Holocaust. And though it seemed as if the world had learned from the most terrible war in humanity, especially the most powerful countries that brought the downfall of the Nazi regime, the United States and the Soviet Union, we discover that these same countries were involved in what was happening in Cambodia before and during the terrifying regime of Khmer Rouge. We remember more than 1.5 million victims and bring the story of the Cambodian genocide, not only to learn from the past, but also to see it as a meaningful warning sign for the future, to remind us of what harm humanity is capable of doing. This warning sign is even more significant as we witness the crisis now happening in Afghanistan. I want to thank our partners, the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation and Classroom Without Borders. I also want to thank Medine Shachar for organizing this important event with our partners. And on a personal note, Loung Ung, your story has touched me very deeply. I carry it with me as an inspirational story and a source of strength that helps me to continue our work in the Ghetto Fighters at the Ghetto Fighters House and to learn from the past, to make sure that such devastating events do not continue, and that not one boy or girl will feel threatened anywhere at any time. I wish us all an enlightening and enriching event. Thank you.
Thank you, Igal. Today's program will be a conversation with Loung Ung. And when we were planning this program, it was clear to me that my dear colleague, Kali Nates, would be the best person to have a discussion with our special guest today. So I would like to introduce our two speakers today. First, Kali Nates. She's the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation, one of our supporters tonight. She is a historian who lectures internationally on Holocaust education, genocide prevention, reconciliation, and human rights. She was one of the founders of the Holocaust and Tutsi Genocide Survivors Groups and Rwanda Genocide Survivors Services in Johannesburg. Born to a family of Holocaust survivors herself, her father and uncle were saved by Oskar Schindler, and unfortunately, as we know, the rest of her family did not survive. And Loung Ung is a best-selling author, activist, and co-writer of the Netflix original movie directed by Angelina Jolie, based on her memoir, First They Killed My Father, released in September 2017. In recognition of her work, the World Economic Forum selected Loung as one of the 100 global youth leaders of tomorrow. Loung was born in 1970 in Phnom Penh. By 1978, the Khmer Rouge had killed her parents and two of her siblings. And she was forced to train as a child soldier. And of course, Tali will be talking with her about her experiences. In 1980, she and her older brother escaped by boat to Thailand, where they spent 5 months in a refugee camp before relocating to Vermont through sponsorship by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and a parish in Burlington. 15 years after her escape, Ung returned to Cambodia and learned that 20 of her relatives had died at the hands of the Khmer Rouge regime. This realization compelled her to devote herself to justice and reconciliation in her homeland. Returning to America, Ung served as a spokesperson for the Campaign for a Landmine-Free World from 1997 to 2005, a project of the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, which was co-recipient of the 1997 Nobel Peace Prize. She has since made how many trips? Over 40 trips, I think, back to Cambodia, maybe more. Loung's memoir, First They Killed My Father, A Daughter of Cambodia Remembers, was a recipient of the 2001 Asian Pacific American Librarians Association Award for Excellence in Adult Nonfiction Literature, and it has been translated and published in many languages. She also wrote 2 more books, Lucky Child and Lulu in the Sky. A daughter of Cambodia reunites with the sister she left behind. Today, she has shared her messages of building resilience, healing from trauma, civic service, activism, and leadership across the world. Loung is the subject of an hour-long documentary for TV and was a contributing writer for the groundbreaking film Girl Rising, profiling 9 girls from 9 countries, including Cambodia, who are struggling against odds to achieve an education. And with these introductions to these 2 amazing, strong women, I want to give the floor to Kali Nates.
Thank you so much, Medine. Thank you all for coming today. It's so heartwarming to see so many friends from all around the world joining us. And tonight we are going to learn together more about the genocide in Cambodia. But I thought before I start the conversation with Loung Ung, to tell you a little bit, for those of you that are not familiar perhaps with some of the details of the harrowing events of the Cambodian genocide, to tell you a little bit about it. During the Cambodian genocide, about 2 million people were killed, anything between 1.7 to 2.2, and we don't know until today how many, in fact, were killed. They were killed, of course, by the Khmer Rouge regime between 1975 and 1979. What is really interesting, and many do not remember that, is that before its independence in 1953, Cambodia was a French colony. Also, what people do not remember is that during the Vietnam War, many thousands and thousands of Vietnamese refugees flooded into Cambodia, and that the US bombing campaign killed probably between 50 to 100 and 50,000 Cambodian citizens. All that brought to a revolution by the Khmer Rouge. And they were very well organized, led by Pol Pot. They took Cambodia in April of 1975. Within hours of invading Phnom Penh, the capital, they began removing people from their homes and instituting discriminatory policies to create its new communist paradise, democratic Kampuchea. They systematically emptied urban areas, separating families and forcing people into the countryside. They closed schools, factories, and hospitals, and banned radios and even music. They attempted to create an agrarian society based on communist ideology and principles, and many people were considered class enemies or agents of imperialist powers. Those targeted included anyone that the Khmer Rouge felt threatened this ideology. That included people with different political views, education, people with education, people of different ethnicities or religions, and professionals, including teachers. By the way, Pol Pot himself was a teacher, but teachers, doctors, former government officials, all were murdered. They actually divided society into two groups, old people and new people. And the old people were peasants who lived in the countryside and were idealized and considered people you can trust. The new people included nearly everyone else, city dwellers, intellectuals, people of non-Khmer ethnicities, even Buddhist monks. People who wore glasses, for example, or spoke a second language were targeted. And the regime believed that all those were too educated and dangerous. They were all forced into slave labor in the killing fields, which were communal farms where many died from exhaustion, malnutrition, and disease. They also created prisons like S21 in Phnom Penh, where they tortured and killed their perceived enemies. And there were more and more enemies that they perceived as their enemies, even Khmer Rouge people. Anyone who wasn't designated as ethnic Khmer peasant was targeted, and those perceived to be unsupportive of the regime's policies and actions were also regarded as enemies and killed. The genocide ended in early 1979 when the Vietnamese army invaded Cambodia and defeated the Khmer Rouge. We will now watch a trailer from the acclaimed film, First, They Killed My Father.
American Marines were flown in from the USS aircraft carriers Okinawa.
Loung Ung, it is such an honor to welcome you to our event today. Hard to believe we watched the little girl in the film. The little girl is you. Your book and film, First They Killed My Father, are so moving, like Eagle said, so touching. The film is available, by the way, on Netflix for those of you who have not watched it yet. And I really call all of you to try and watch the film. Tonight, we cannot wait to learn more about your life and about the process of writing of your book. And I would like to start by a quote from you, your words. The story was always there and it wouldn't go away. My memory was never silent. Loung, let us start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, about your family, growing up in Phnom Penh before the genocide. It can be they have a storm, Loung.
Right, we are dealing with a storm hitting Ohio soon, so hopefully, I'm still looking where she is.
Yeah, there is a storm, very big hurricane hitting where Loung is.
So.
Yes, I think we've done it.
Yes.
Okay. Good. Excellent.
Apologies. I was trying to unmute and the unmute button wouldn't work. So
welcome. We are so pleased that you joined us. Hopefully you heard my opening question. Would love you, first of all, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure where in what time zone you are, but very moving film, very moving book. Maybe get us a little bit into your family, your childhood, your time in growing up in Phnom Penh before the Khmer Rouge came in 1975.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Mr. Cohen for that wonderful introduction, and Tally and everybody organizing this Talking Memory event, and for having me here. I have to say it is an honor and a privilege and very moving and touching to speak to people who know why this is important, why it is important that we share stories of survivals and resilience. And I have to also say that I have been so taken care of by you all and by your kindness and generosity of spirits that I'm not as nervous as I normally am when I speak to people. So I thank you for that. As where I came from, as you already shared, Tally, I was born in Cambodia in 1970. So it's a long time ago for some people, but sometimes it doesn't feel all that long to me, especially considering how young I was when all of that happened to me. I was only 5 years old when the soldiers came into my city. And until then, when I came into the world, I didn't know anything about the war. I didn't know about the civil war that has been going on in Cambodia since 1955 until the end of it in 1975 when the US left Vietnam and left Southeast Asia. I didn't know about the civil war that was part of the Second Indochina War, otherwise in the West known as the Vietnam War or the American War if you're in Vietnam. I didn't know about wars. I didn't know about Afghanistan and Mozambique and Angola and all these countries that were fighting wars in all of the world because I didn't need to. I came into the world to a father who was a military officer and a businessman, a military police person and a businessman, and therefore had a job that afforded us a lifestyle where I could go to school 3 times a day, 6 days a week with my 3 brothers and 3 sisters. And I came to the world to 3 brothers who were so cool, or thought they were, wearing their bell-bottom pants and listening to Elvis Presley music, trying desperately to grow Elvis sideburns. And to 3 sisters who I played with so loud and often that my father at times threatened to replace us with monkeys. Which, for those of you who've been to Cambodia, we have many, many, many monkeys. And so life was charmed. Life was where I spent my days with my family and going to school, even though I knew something was amiss. Because many times my father would keep us from school. And many times my parents would whisper amongst themselves about explosions that rocked or destroyed a market or in school, or having to have our families be careful about where we moved and where we went, or the influx of hundreds of thousands of IDP, internally displaced people, coming in from the countryside, coming into the city to live. We knew something was amiss, but my parents kept us shelter from it, so I didn't know about the war. And it was a shock to me when the soldiers arrived with their guns and their grenades and their black shirts and pants, and wearing big smiles, screaming into the bullhorn that the war was over. And I didn't know what the war was. And for the next 3 years, 8 months, and 21 days, I would learn what the war was. As you so, I know, graciously, as you so shared already, Tally, with people, that Cambodia became stranger than fiction. Cambodia became a country that was a prison, albeit without walls. And all its 7 million citizens were prisoners in this country, where one by one, day by day, moment by moment, our rights would be taken up from us. The soldiers came into the city and started pulling out their bullhorns and started screaming for us to move out of our homes, to evacuate the cities, all cities, because the Americans were coming in with their B-52 metal killing birds, they said, and then they would bomb us, and if we didn't leave, we would all be killed. Phnom Penh was populated by 2 million people. We were evacuated in 72 hours. We didn't know where we would go. We didn't know which directions to take, but the soldiers were there with their guns, emptying the hospitals and the schools and the houses. And if you refused to leave, they went in there and hurt you. And many people died from that evacuation. And from there, we would go to villages, to live in villages that were more akin to labor camps, where every day consisted of only Mondays, and every Monday was a work day. And it didn't matter if you were 6 or 60. It didn't matter if you were a musician or a dancer or a singer. It only mattered if you could work the land and grow the food to support a war you didn't know about, you didn't want, to dig trenches, to build dams, to support a revolution. You had no say, you had no power, you had no right, you had no voice, and you could not protest. Because to speak up, to speak out was a danger, was viewed as a treasonous act. To gather 3 people in one location at once was viewed as a crime punishable by imprisonment or possibly even death. And so little by little, day by day, we saw our rights taken away. We moved from one village to another where soldiers gathered us around. And in that first moment, I remember as a child, the soldiers took our clothes from our backpacks, dumped them into the village squares, and flick a match and lit them all on fire. And for the next 4 years or so, we would wear black shirts and black pants every single day. We were told what to say, how to wear our hair, what to call our parents, so that they were no longer our individual, loving persons. They were now just comrades. We were told when to eat, where to sleep, when to travel. We live in fear. I knew from then on, at 5 years old, that to survive, I had to become dumb, deaf, mute, blind, invisible, just so I could have the privilege of taking that next breath, just so I could live. Because if I messed up, if I wasn't paying attention, if I somehow outed myself as a person who came from a family or from the city who were targeted because of my biracial parentage, my mother being Chinese, my father being Cambodian, of someone who actually went to school, of somebody who spoke Chinese and Cambodian and was studying French. If I somehow let the soldiers knew my background and didn't hide myself enough, it wasn't my life only that I would endanger, but the lives of my parents and sisters and brothers and loved ones. And so I hid myself so completely, so silent, that for that 3 years, 8 months, and 21 days, I do not remember the sound of laughter of my own or another person. I do not remember a moment of play. I do not remember moments of peace or hope, but I remember many moments of faith and prayers, because the human spirit is strong, and no matter how you hide, no matter how you silence yourself, your heart still beats. And that, as long as it was beating, I knew that there was space in there for me to hold on to something else. And so the soldiers came, and my family and I were at first together until the soldiers came for my father. And they came with their guns and their grenades and their excuse that they needed him to go remove an ox cart stuck in the mud. When he walked off with the soldiers that night, I remember the sky being a palette that was painted with brilliant magenta and gold and red and pink. And how I saw that that was such a beautiful heaven. And at the same time, I wonder how there could be a heaven, how there could be beauty when there was only hell and hurt in my heart. And still, I held on to hope that someday, one day, this war would end. When it did, on January 7th, 1979, I was 7 years old. I was 9 years old. And it would come too late for an estimator of 1.7 to 2 million Cambodians who would die from starvations, disease, hard labor, and executions out of a population of 7 million people. What would we do? What would I always ask American students who have read my book and speak to me? I wonder, what would a nation do where over a quarter of your population was to perish in a span of 4 years? How would you rebuild? Where would you go? Where would you find sanctuary for your heart, love for your heart, and your spirituality that had been so truncated and cut short by war? Where would you find these things again? And those are the things I have spent the last 4 decades searching and looking. Those are the journeys that I have spent the last 4 decades hoping to find again.
Yeah, and it's such a journey, and this is the journey that I would like to unpack a little bit with you. And it's never easy. It's never easy, even after 40 years. It's the little girl is always there. The 5-year-old is always there. The terror, the trauma that we know today is the genocide in Cambodia. You didn't know that. You lived it. You didn't give it a name, as you said. So maybe can you reflect on the impact of the loss of your parents, your sister, or your family members? that loss, what impact did it have on you? What was the impact of the indoctrination on you? Because you also were part of that system of the Khmer Rouge of indoctrination. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with the trauma? How do you deal with the trauma over the years, and how do you deal with the trauma today?
Yeah. For me, there was so many losses around the core loss of loved ones. There was, I lost my parents, 2 sisters, and 20 other relatives. And every day I feel the holes left by them. Every year I remember how I miss them, and at all the events, the birthdays, the college graduation, the day I walked down the aisle to marry my husband, all these moments of life that I wish my parents and sisters were there to share with me, I am reminded of the fact that they're not here. And then there were the larger loss of innocence in childhood and the anxiety and fear that was bred into my heart. The fact that in America, my friends every 4th of July did not cower in fear when the fireworks explode over their heads, and when they look at the fireworks at the fairgrounds or at the celebrations and eating their hot dogs and hamburgers and applauding how wonderful that was. What a great show. But for me, it wasn't a show. For me, fireworks also came with moments of flashbacks, of triggering war traumas, of thinking that the soldiers are back and the bombs are back. And why is it that the people in the fairground did not hear the screaming cries of that baby as the mother was trying to escape the bombings? And so those were the moments where I actually have to steel myself. I have to remind myself that I am safe, that physically and emotionally, that I am in a place where I can be safe. And yet, what of the sisters and the brothers and the families I left behind, who actually went on living in Cambodia long after I left it, in a country that was littered with millions of landmines, that until 1991, the Khmer Rouge was still in power, and that they were traveling and trying to grow food and trying to farm the land, where the soldiers were still coming into the villages and stealing bicycle, human life, and food. What of the siblings that I left behind? And so those were not things that I could leave behind. And then there were the larger, also even more than that, of the anxiety and depressions that I found myself having to deal through growing up, when my body turned from that of a young girl to a young woman. My mind also started reacting in a way where I thought I was either dead or dying, that my body was now remembering experiences that my mind was able to shut off. And then with that came the fear and the hate I was taught. After my parents were taken from me, I was sent to live in camps that were, for lack of a better word, where I was trained to hate, to hurt, to kill. They were child soldiers training camps, where the supervisors didn't teach me to be better leaders and to be critical thinkers and to be readers and to be friends. They taught me with guns half my body's height, a third my body's weight. And they told me that a weak person would not survive. And so I had this image and this belief that to cry meant that I would be seen and viewed as a weak person. And if I cried, I would not survive. And so I hardened myself. And they also taught that the world out there wanted to harm us pure revolutionary children, that the world wanted to hurt us, the Americans, the French, the Vietnamese, the foreigners. And for us to survive, we had to hurt them first. It took me many years living in America, seeing people coming toward me to tell myself that they meant me no ill, that people actually wish me well, that when people extend their hands to shake mine, that their hands were not hiding a knife behind their back to stab me with. I don't know how other people can understand the impact of having a faith system, a belief where you believe in goodwill, where you are taught to believe that there is goodness in the world, where you have to teach yourself this because you were taught to believe that the world was full of ill will. So for me, those are still the issues that I have to tell myself and teach myself constantly, that there is good in the world and that people do not wish me ill, that people do not want to harm me. And that even now when I'm speaking with you and I have moments where I am afraid, I take heart in the fact that the people with us right now do not want to see me fall. And that if I do, you, Talia, you, Maydeen, you are there with me extending a helping hand. And we all need to give this to each other.
Absolutely. The trust that is lost as a little girl, I mean, it was all over only when you were less than 10 years old, 9 years old. It's so hard to build it, and you build it and you work on it all your life. And I would love you to reflect about the importance of telling the story, because you are telling this personal testimony now for a few years, not many years, but for some years. Why is it important, Loung, to share your personal story?
Yeah, there's a belief, I think, that and at least anyway, in when we're watching the news, when we hear stories of 6 million Jewish people killed during the Holocaust, it's such a large number, 6 with 7 zeros. When you hear about 1.7 to 2 million Cambodians died, when you hear about 800,000 Rwandan people who were macheted to death in 100 days, when you hear about all these people, 140 million people's worth in the last century who died from many different wars, it is hard to put a face to the family members, to the people, to the human hearts, to the dreams. And this was brought to me, I learned from this, like many other American students in America, was the introduction of the Diary of Anne Frank. And when I read that book, it made a difference in my life. And I read it and it didn't seem to me like it was history. I read the book and it felt to me like I could understand the fear. I could understand the anxiety. I could understand the sense of hiding out, of hiding yourself, of being so careful. And I could understand the pain of watching your parents worry, of watching your family members think often about each other and how you're going to keep each other safe. And then I felt the heartbreak at the separations of the Franks family one by one as they were taken from each other. And it broke my heart. I was yet then not strong enough to tell people of my story. I could not speak to people of my story. My friends, when I was growing up in America, didn't know about my story, didn't know about Cambodia. And if they asked, and many didn't, if they asked, I just said my families weren't here. And yet every Christmas holidays or school breaks, they would come back with their stories of grandparents that they spent time with or gifts that they got from their aunts and uncles. I had no stories to share. But in the stories of Anne Frank, we could share and speak of the stories that affected us all. And so for me, it was the first book that taught me about the importance of putting a human face on these larger issues of war, of tragedies, of horrors. And then when I was a little older, somebody gave me a second book that would change my life even more. And it was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. That book blew my mind. That book taught me so much that it wasn't just our individual story that was important to share, but that we as individuals, all our stories are connected to each other. That we are connected, that what happened in the Holocaust is connected to what happened to Cambodia, to Rwanda, to Bosnia, to many different places in the world, that we are all a part of the human race. And that if we could speak our stories and vibrate each other's heartstrings, that sometimes we go through life, we live life in such a fast moving time with so many things that we think are important, that we forget that we need to pay attention to the vibrations of our heartstrings, to the importance of life. And story is the umbilical cord of what connects us to one another, what connects our human life to our humanity, what connects our hearts to our spirits. And so I think for me, it's not just the importance of sharing my story, but in doing so, I get to be connected to the larger story of our human story.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, now you're speaking about Viktor Frankl, and I was so moved when I read what you said about reading Man's Search for Meaning. You said, a friend gave me a book that would save my life. The book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. The wisdom the book taught me about logotherapy, Mr. Frankl's gift to me, was to let me know that I was not alone in my pain and suffering. And I just thought that you actually put it into words, what so many survivors of the Holocaust, from Rwanda, from Cambodia, from so many genocide mass atrocities are exactly thinking. What is the meaning of my life? And you wrote them the book. And I would like to watch together the trailer where we see you losing your father. And we see the words from the book with the scenes from the film. Just, it's a short clip of about a minute and a half, and just to see how the book and film are coming together. Let's watch it. So you wrote the book. First, they killed my father. I think 21 years after the genocide. How was that process for you? How was it also then to make the film? Was it traumatic? Was it healing? Maybe talk to us through the process of writing and making the film.
When I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, I started to do more research and learn the therapeutic benefit of logotherapy, of not just writing as a way to chronicle my life, but to actually delve into my history and my trauma. And so I started putting and started just writing into my journals and diaries. And it would be many years before I had the courage to turn the pages of my journals and diaries into a book. And for me, the process of writing the book was so therapeutic and cathartic. Because when you experience trauma, in my experience in wars and anything that's painful to you, I think that the traumas and the pain exists like a dark clouds over your head constantly. And for me, it was as if the clouds followed me everywhere. And it's, dark and rumbly and scary. And at times it would explode and become thunders, and it would shoot and cause me pain. And I would not have any control over when I would react, when I would cry. And it was almost as it was too much. Writing was a process where I could, with my pen, poke it into the dark clouds of trauma and pulled one by one an experience, a story, a vignette that I could manage and describe that onto the pages, and then have power over it. There is power in naming the things that you are afraid of. There is power in naming the things that haunt you. And so I would do that with my pen, solitary. And with making the film, it was a community of experience. It was an experience where it wasn't just mine alone, but where I was shared, and where I would share it with 20,000 people who worked on the film. It was such a privilege to be in Cambodia, to work with 20,000 extras, Cambodian actors and cast and production designers and makeup artists and costume designers and musicians and all the people who were either descendants or survivors themselves of the Khmer Rouge Genocide. Now, I believe many of us here together know the benefits of being with people who've had a shared collective trauma, and you can, in a way, speak the same language. Having grown up in America, where I was speaking a completely different language of trauma to the people I was living with, to be in a place where I didn't have to speak my fears or my pains, but when I was on a movie set, and if I was having a moment, another Cambodian would be next to me. A hand would reach for mine. A palm would just be gently placed on my back. Somebody was with me all the time. And these were the people who themselves were traumatized and victimized and were survivors. And we were all there together with the same common goal of wanting our stories to be told. We all put our DNAs and our imprints onto the screens, onto the films, because we wanted people to know. That for me was so, it was such a gift. It was spiritual in a way. I went into making the film fearful of the moments that I thought would shatter me. And those were the moments where the soldiers took away my father, or when the bombs were exploding, or when the guns were raised at me. I was so afraid of these moments, as I was when I was a child. But as an adult going back, the moments that shattered my heart were not these, because I now have my voice. I have my allies, I have my support, I have my work. I have my belief in doing what is right in our world and fighting injustices. But the moments that I could not take back from the soldiers were when my parents and my siblings and all 9 of us sat down at a dinner table. And even though the people who sat down for dinners were actors playing my families and parents, I felt their presence. I felt their spirits. And my child's heart in that moment wanted nothing more than to sit back at that table with my families. As an adult, I also am so grateful that I could turn this moment to share it with people, to say to them, when you sit down for dinner, look around the table, see who you are sitting with, love them, see them, be there with them, put down your phone, because I would give anything to be in your position. I would give anything to just have one more dinner with my family.
Oh, so beautifully said. And you speak about the you know, almost reincarnation of the family through the actors and through writing the book and bringing voice to those that are so long gone. But one more thing that you do, and you do amazingly well, and it is so important, you educate the world about the genocide, because the world has very short memory. And you said, again, I'm quoting from you, as I tell people about genocide, I get the opportunity to redeem myself. I had the chance to do something that's worth me being alive. The more I tell people, the less the nightmares haunt me. So your books and the film assist in educating about the genocide. And maybe share with us, why do you think education is important about these trauma of the past?
I think any education is important, but education about genocide and wars and traumas is so important, because we need to educate our young people about empathy and compassion and kindness and their powers, and that they have power to make a difference. We need to know and share with people that when something happens in Cambodia, when a genocide happened in Bosnia and Rwanda, that it affects our human heart. And all, behind the numbers, behind the politics, behind the guns and bombs, there is a mother who's not unlike your mother. There is a father who has similar dreams than the dreams that fathers around the world in places where they're not harmed dream for their children, to be safe, to be together, to be educated, to build a better life and create a better community and a better world for all of us. Through education, we not only learn about what happened in the wars and the traumas and the harm and the hurt, but I hope through the studying of genocide and hurt that you also see the love, the moments of courage and sacrifice, and the things in the heart that keeps us moving forward, and the hope that keeps us together, and knowing that we are dreaming of a different future for ourselves and our families. This is what education and what educating of what happened is all about, because we see the results. We know if we don't learn from our past, we will keep on repeating the mistakes we have made. If we don't know what happened in Cambodia, we will allow it to happen again and again and again. And yes, we cannot control all the outcomes, but we can make a difference to one individual, to one community, to one country, even if it's the smallest difference. That will reverberate and that will change. I was once one of hundreds of thousands of children who came out of Cambodia traumatized, but I am here today. I am here because somebody, somewhere in a church, in a place I had never heard of in Vermont, got together, form a committee to help a refugee family in Cambodia, my brother, my sister, and myself and I, and brought us to America. And then these group of people didn't leave us there. They came together and taught us how to shop in American grocery stores, which we didn't know how to do. And then they came, and Linda Costello came and took me to the library and helped me get my first library card, which changed my life again, because if I had my books, I was never bored. And then they came and walked me to school, the first time I'd been to school in 5 years. And then they came and they taught me how to cross the road in Americas, because we didn't have cars in the villages I came from in Cambodia. They had to learn to teach us all these things that Americans took for granted, but somebody, kind-hearted person who knew and were educated about the genocide in Cambodia, took that as the basis of their compassion and kindness to help us out. And that is why I believe in de-education of what happens around the world, because we can take what we've learned to build our compassion and kindness so that we could act with intentional acts of kindness toward others.
Yeah, and that is exactly the choices that people are making. They learn about the genocide and they learn critical thinking and to make choices. And you spoke about the amazing people that looked after you, that got you out. Maybe for our listeners, just to make the connections, you were this child soldier, then, you know, the Khmer Rouge is defeated. How do you get out, your brother and sister? How do you get to the United States? From where? And just connect the dots for us.
Yeah. In 1975, when the Khmer Rouge was defeated, and my 4 surviving siblings and myself looked around Cambodia, and there were few teachers to teach in schools that were non-existent. There were no jobs. The soldiers were still, the Khmer Rouge were still in power. And we, like everybody else, dreamt of a better life, of a life where we could rebuild ourselves and our family. And back then, there were only 2 ways out of Cambodia. You either, one, walk and have to pay somebody, raise enough gold to pay somebody to walk you across the land of Cambodia and then cross the borders between Cambodia and Thailand to where we knew there were refugee camps. And we also knew that this path to the refugee camps, to opportunity, was littered with anti-personnel landmines, these tiny weapon systems the size of a hockey puck or a compact powder that once in the ground stay active for decades. And once in the ground, they care not whether the foot that step on them are that of a child or soldiers or a friend or a foe. And they litter in the millions in Cambodia, and especially in the hundreds of thousands on the borderland. And we knew of so many people who were hurt and killed by landmines. And so it was such a dangerous route. But my brother chose to take the other route, which was the boat people's route, of which my brother was able to find enough gold, raise and borrowed enough money, which I think akin to about $40 US today, to take 3 people out. Himself, he was 21, and his wife, and he had to choose one of 4 siblings to take with him. And I was chosen because as the youngest sibling, it was the family's belief that if we made it to safety, I would have the most number of years to get an education. And that was the reason I was chosen. But to leave behind my family, my culture, my language, we had to then get onto a tiny boat to go from Cambodia to Thailand, where of which they put a tarp on top of us and put fish on top of the tarp. And then from Vietnam, we got on another boat to go from Vietnam to Thailand. That was a 4-day, 3-night journey where many other boats were, and our boats included, were attacked by pirates and people were hurt and harmed. And eventually we made it to the refugee camp, and it was 6 months after that we made it. And we arrived to America as refugees. The journey cost us all the gold we could borrow, left behind all the siblings we did not know and could not tell if they were safe, and didn't know if they were safe and couldn't tell them if we were safe. We had no connections with them. And it took us a year, and it would be 15 years before I was able to go back to Cambodia and reunite with my families again.
Wow, what a story. And of course, some of it is in your books and in the film. As time is running out, I want to ask you perhaps 1 or 2 other questions and then open to our wonderful audience that have lots and lots of questions too. I had the honor of working with colleagues and survivors from Cambodia for many years, and also had the honor to visit Cambodia, one of my last trips before COVID in 2019. You visited, of course, at least 40 times after, and then making of the film there after the genocide. So can you reflect, do you think that the country, how is the country doing? Is the country still suffering from a collective trauma? Is education, is the justice process in the past years helpful? How is the country doing?
40 years after Khmer Rouge has ended, Cambodia is now still in a process of rebuilding. It is a country where we now have teachers who are teaching students again. And just in the last 10 years or so, the Khmer Rouge Genocide are now being taught in schools and in high schools. Before that, it wasn't being taught. Cambodia is a small country with a population of 15 million people strong. We have gone through a collective trauma together, and we are still working to rebuild our infrastructures, our healthcare, our civil service, and our governance, the government in Cambodia. We have, my sister and brothers and many uncles and aunts and nieces, and the second and third generations now of the Ungs are now growing out of the ashes of war. It is, tourism is very strong. The last couple of years has been very difficult. I have not been to Cambodia in 2 years because of COVID. Before that, I've been going back to Cambodia at least once or twice a year, and I've made, I believe, 45 plus 50 trips back since. And it just broke my heart that I was not able to go back to Cambodia the last 2 years. And from what my sister is saying, that they are surviving, they are struggling and to get vaccines to be safe to travel. And as a whole, I think the country is still really struggling. In 1997, the Cambodian government went to the United Nations and asked for their help to create a tribunal to put on trial the Khmer Rouge leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. They ended up putting on trial 5 members of the Khmer Rouge Central Committees, or the top leaders of the Khmer Rouge, and they were indicted and they were convicted of, a few of them were convicted of war crimes and then crimes against humanity and genocide. That has been a wonderful educational opportunity, because I went back for the tribunal when it started, and to be there. I remember the first day when the tribunal took place, and I was there, and in front of me were a couple of rows of students who took time out of their universities to go there and witness what happened. And they didn't know. They didn't know because they grew up with so many family members who weren't there, and those who survived found it so painful to speak about that they couldn't speak. And they couldn't share the story, and they were there listening. And then in that same courtroom, I also saw 24 or so Buddhist monks sitting in the tribunal courtrooms with their head bows. And every time there would be a break, they would be chanting, and they would be chanting and blessing the spirits and the souls. And I just thought, this, in addition to the issue of justice, which to me there will never be a tribunal. There will never be any amount of people who were indicted or convicted or put on trial who were found guilty. There will never be, for me, a tribunal that will make up for what happens. But with education, with faith, this is where we can rebuild ourselves with the education for the future, and the spirituality and our Buddhist monks for our past, and to heal our past. And for me, that is actually more important in many sense.
Yeah, and actually it is the EEEC tribunal is in the news at the moment because there is an appeal process of one of those perpetrators. And Yeah, I really, really believe in your voice for education, and as an educator myself, of course, your words are very strong in my heart. Maybe last question before we open to our audience. I'm sure everyone wants to know about your life today. Your resilience is inspirational. So what is your message for the world of today? And the world of today is a difficult world. The images in the news are difficult. COVID is difficult. Wars are difficult, but especially as war, trauma, and genocide is still with us today. Tell us about your message for all of us today.
I believe that if you ever had a broken heart, it does not mean you are broken. The circumstances, my circumstances, broke my heart and shattered it. The war, in many ways, truncated my spiritual development and put me on a path for many years where I did not believe. I did not believe in humanity. I did not believe in the gods. I did not believe in the kindness of the human heart. And I thought I was broken because of that. I thought I was damaged. Now I've learned that just because your heart has been broken, that you are not broken, and that you have power, that we have power, that I was not broken. And writing has taught me to take back my power. Speaking up have shown me ways that I could take back my voice in my life, and also satisfy that little desire, that defiance that the soldiers were not going to win. They were not going to silence me, that they were not going to make me afraid, that I was going to, with my pen, with my work, with my voice, with my allies, with groups like yours, that I was going to make sure to negate their legacy. I was going to make sure and make it small their legacy of war and traumas, and make our legacy of peace and work and humanity much bigger than the darkness they perpetrated upon the world. I believe in this very strongly. I also believe very strongly that peace is not an entitlement, that peace is not a dream we wish upon the stars, that peace is not something we prayed upon and hope others will deliver it, that peace is not something we ask our government to deliver it, to work on it, or our friends and our neighbors to dedicate their life and their talents on it. That peace is not an entitlement, a wish, or a dream. Peace is rather an action. Many, many actions, whether it is in our community, in our heart, in our home, at our schools. Peace is many, many actions committed, strategized, worked on by all of us. Whether we wake up and decide one day we will be kind, and today we will educate ourselves and each other. Today we will extend our helping hand and help somebody else rebuild a better life. Today we will learn more about other people. Today we will make a donations to groups that we believe in, whose work we know makes a difference. Today we will not sit and be silent and be still. Today we will make a difference because we can. It is our strongest power. It is the power to make a difference in every which way, whether as a mother, a daughter, a sister, a musician, a baker, a dancer, a writer, an activist. We need to all be involved in this work of making peace, because this is the only one world we have. And if we don't make peace on this world, where are we going to go? Where are we going to live? Therefore, we need to make this work for us. And when we do this work of making peace in whichever beautiful way, in whatever authentic voice and abilities and time frame you have that fit for you, when we do this peace work, we not only change the lives of people we want to assist, we change ourselves. We showed those who've been harmed and hurt that though they have seen and witnessed the worst of man's acts of inhumanities to man, we can show them examples of the best acts of man's humanity to man. And that absolutely will make a difference. And it has.
Absolutely. And with these words, I see you again as this little girl, this 5-year-old that started this journey, this impossible journey of war, of loss, of trauma, of education, of learning, of growing. And again, I'll quote from you, Loung, and I'll say your words: "The war child urges me on, gives me strength, and inspiring me to live life to the fullest." And I think you inspired us all today to do a little bit more, dedicate a bit more to make this world of ours a better place, because of course, as you said, it's not aliens from out of space that will come and put a magic wand that will fix us all. It is us that need to do the fixing. So thank you so much for sharing with us a little about your life. And thank you for inspiring us all to do more. And with that, I'll give to Maydeen the floor to open the many questions from the floor. You're muted, Maydeen.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Again, I want to say thank you to Loung Ung for opening up your heart. I think many of us felt the chords reaching us as well. And of course, to Tali for facilitating this conversation with you. Actually, someone here read all your books. And she says, Loung, I love all 3 of your books. Have you ever been able to find out more about the fate of your parents and sisters? How do you live with the not knowing?
What your eyes don't see, your mind makes up many scenarios. For anybody who has lost a loved ones, you know that your mind sometimes can just make up the worst case scenarios. Having gone back to Cambodia, a small country that is today littered with over 20,000 mass graves. And in all those mass graves, over 1 million skulls have been accounted for. And there's somebody's fathers and daughters and brothers and sisters. And majority of them were killed not with bullets or guns, but with a blunt instrument smashed to the back of their heads. This is a fact. I do not know what happened to my father. In my worst days, the fact of these mass graves, of many of which I've actually visited and stood on the edge of and gave a silent prayer to. In my worst days, the facts of these mass graves will haunt me. In my best days, I prayed that his death was quick and painless. I prayed for the soldiers to have used one of their bullets on him and make his death quick and painless. In my worst days, I wonder when the soldiers came for my mother and 4-year-old sister, and they were together. I wonder if they were torn from each other's arms, and who saw whom taken. In my best days, I pray that no matter what happened and however they were taken, they held each other in their hearts, and that they were loved, and that the tears they cried were of love and of missing each other. I have been so blessed to find writing as my tool to heal my heart. In my book, Lulu in the Sky, I was able to write a different narrative and to make this narrative and to put it out there for my mother's and father's descendants and to have a different vision of their last days. And in my book, I was able to write a scene where instead of being separated, they were together. And with my pens and my words, I painted red rouge on my mother's lips and a silk blue shirt on my mother's body, and my father in a clean shirt, and my mother's and father's hands holding each other in the village as all of us children, grown and happy, and together sang and danced around a bonfire. And then they sat there and watched us. And they watched this as their spirits descended into the heavens in the sky. On my best days, this is the image and the vision I hold on to. And this is now becoming more and more the vision that I go to sleep with.
That's beautiful. And I want to say that if you do watch the movie, I think you can see how you imagine how things happened. And we see both versions in the movie to show how you deal with this loss, that there are two roads you can take, and apparently you go down each one at different times, and you just have to go with the road and finish the way, and maybe take the next one the next time. And I think it's a wonderful way of kind of dealing with this loss when you really don't know. And I think that the person that asked the question got an amazing answer that I think we can use in all of our feelings of loss, where maybe we don't know the answers, and we don't know what happened, and we didn't have time to say goodbye to someone. So,
and may I share also and encourage those of us the people who've lost loved ones, the importance of writing a different narrative. We can be the author. We are the author of our own lives. And with our words, we can create a different narrative. We don't have to always, because whether you write it or not, the narratives of what breaks your heart play themselves over and over and over again in your head. And then sometimes it is the narratives that will imprint itself in your dreams and in your hearts. So create a new one. Create a spiritual one. Create one where there's love. Create one that could possibly be the truth with the essence of that truth. Create a narrative, because who am I to say? I was not with my parents the day they were taken and the day they left the earth. So maybe in their heads, in their spirits, they were there together. And I want to write that truth. I believe in that truth, actually. I do not believe my father was standing at the edge of that mass grave alone. I do not believe he stood at that mass grave looking at the graves. I believe he stood there, and in his heart and in his spirits and in his mind, he was with my mother. And all I needed to do with my writing and to create this narrative is to put the words down and to share it with my families, because I really believe that this is what has been, and their ancestors, my nieces and nephews, who have read this new narratives I created of their grandparents being together, have thanked me, and it has been healing. So it's a wonderful tool to rewrite your narratives to one that actually help and not hurt.
I also think what you're saying, if I think about how we talk about Holocaust remembrance, is that your parents, their lives was not that last moment in their lives. Their lives was all the other experiences that you had together. And I think that way of remembering them also helps you kind of deal with the fact that maybe the end of their life wasn't like the rest of their life, but that everything was there. So their whole life was there at that moment. So I think it's a beautiful way of looking at that. There was a very interesting question. You talked about connecting to the actors that played your family sitting around the table, which was so touching. Someone asked, was there a screening in Cambodia of the movie, and how did the Cambodian people react to watching the film?
Yes, we had 7 screenings in Cambodia. We had 7 screenings, and the reaction and the support was overwhelming. And in Cambodia, we didn't take out ads. We didn't tell people people knew a little bit that we were going to be in such and such a town. And at the last screening, we were expecting 4,000 Cambodians to show up. We were screening the film on a big screen in a old soccer field, and we were expecting maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people. I believe the estimate was that close to 20,000 people came. And to watch the film, and people came with their mats and their families, and it was just on the ground. We don't put up chairs in Cambodia. People came with their bamboo mats, and then their rice and their water and their blankets, and then we all just sat on the floor. And to watch the film with 20,000 people, and Angkor Wat was 2,000 people, in Phnom Penh 7,000 people came in, and it was just overwhelming. And the things that Cambodians said to me afterward was, how did you make it so real? And was that hard? And my answers, and that was from the young people, from the older people who went through it. We were just there supporting each other. But for the younger people, I said to them, we needed to make it real and make it hard, because war is hell. It is hell. Harming somebody, whatever you believe, however, wherever you lean politically, one way or another, when you pick up a gun and you fight a war, it is hell, whether you are the soldiers or the victims, whether you are the journalists or the mother. It is hell, and we must not forget that. And we also needed to show them glimpse. I think what really broke their hearts was the glimpse of love and family and togetherness. And that for us, we needed to honor the people we were telling the story of. And them coming together was a way to honor the people who went through the Khmer Rouge Genocide. So it was received so overwhelmingly well that I was moved, and still am moved.
That's incredible, because I know that there's a problem with memory spaces in Cambodia and in Rwanda. It's not for the actual people who suffered, but maybe for another agenda. So just to hear that the movie could actually be a vessel to bring healing and remembrance, and to bring it out in the open in such an authentic way is very moving to hear. I think that I want to have, not a question, but I do want to share with you what one of our, someone in the audience wrote. Alexis, I can't say the last name, I think it's Sizzy. She says, thank you for sharing your story. I have had my students read your book and watch both the film and interviews with you. Your story resonates with my high school students, and they draw strength from your resilience and hope. And I just want to do an end note that I grew up in the 1970s. I was never taught, obviously in America, I was never taught about the genocide in Cambodia. And I think that hopefully programs like this, your book and the movie, are ways to share with people not only your story, but the need, your passion to have this story pass on, not only as a personal story, but as a message that we have to remember what people are capable of doing, and that we have to look for peace. And also, I think one more thing that I think we're all going to take with us, that even though you have a broken heart, it doesn't mean you're broken. And I think that maybe that was the most powerful message that you brought to us today. And we can see in front of us a strong, inspirational woman that can tell her story safely without fear, and share it with us. So I want to thank you again, Loung Ung.
May I also add that the heart is the strongest muscle in the human body. And for as many times as it breaks, it has the ability and capabilities to heal. With that said, that we are all, none of us got here on our own, that we are here because of each other and the empathy and compassion and kindness given to each other. And that even today, the person, the strength I have has also, it's made stronger because of support Nadine and Tally and everybody involved in this have done so well to be kind to me. And I keep bringing this point because I just think it's so important that sometimes we devalue what we do for each other. Sometimes we look at how the world is changing and who are the agents of change in our world. And we think of it as somebody who's famous or big or large and well known, but that every day, and not giving the value and the full credit for the everyday ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things to make this world a better place, to make this world a safer place, to make our community more livable. I right now can think of so many people who helped me to be here. And for this, every time I think, I hear and I'm grateful for your kind words. Every time I hear this, I just want to thank all the people who helped me to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I hear people say that I am strong, I want to thank Maya Angelou for her book, I Know Now Why the Caged Bird Sings. Every time somebody say, I am so grateful you're speaking, I want to thank Anne Frank for her diary. Every time I hear people say, I like your book, I want to thank Viktor Frankl for teaching me to listen to my own voice. And so all of us need to value that what we do for other people will affect their life in their ways, in their days, in ways we don't know, and from people we may never ever meet. But I am still very grateful to all of them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if you're already saying thank you, I also want to say thank you again, first of all, to our amazing audience. I will send you the chat because there's some incredible things being said there. We don't have time for so many responses, but also to thank our partners for today's program. As you said, Tali Nates, but also the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. We have representatives from the two other Holocaust museums as well, and also Classrooms Without Borders. Again, these two partners had the insight and the ability to talk about genocide and not just about the Holocaust. And I think because of that, and because of the programs that they do, we were able to join in and bring you here. It was really one of the first things that I discussed with Tali over a year ago, that what do you think about Loung Ung? Maybe we should try to talk to her. And she's like, yes, absolutely. And I'm so thankful that we were able to do this. It was canceled once and we were worried about today with the storm, and in the end everything worked out and the dark cloud didn't bother us. So I want to again say to everyone, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being an amazing audience. Thank you for your questions and your comments. And Loung Ung, thank you again for opening your heart and sharing your incredible story with us. And Tali, thank you so much for being our facilitator. I couldn't have thought of a better person to talk with Loung Ung. And of course, we hope to see everybody again after the Jewish holidays in October. So as we say here in Israel, shalom, and thank you. Toda.